What, Cynthia?
When you have aspects that are typically considered masculine or feminine, would you have both of them?
Right. A little bit of both, right? And I think the research sort of illustrates that we are all pretty much androgynous, which means we're a little bit country, a little bit rock and roll. We are a little bit feminine and a little bit masculine. I am masculine in lots of ways. I'm very, very feminine in lots of ways. My wife is a lot more masculine than I am in lots of different ways. But the idea is to be an effective communicator, I think we need to try to understand what perhaps is the best, most effective communication strategies for the context. So for instance, when somebody is talking to you about problems that they might have, what communication skill might be a good skill to try to learn and behave in that situation?
Listening.
What's that? Listening, but a particular type of listening.
Active listening.
Yeah, but even more specific. What's that?
Are you not like it's gonna be feminine or masculine?
No, I'm being more specific than that. I think, weren't you all talking about
Affirmative?
this? What's that?
Affirmative.
Or affirmative. I was thinking about empathy.
Okay.
Empathetic listening, but trying to understand where it's... And the research indicates who is generally better at empathy? Women. So does that mean that men should say, oh, well, you know, I'm a man, so I can't be empathetic. Screw that. No. So all of us should try on these different communicative strategies. The problem is that our society oftentimes at the same time will punish folks for trying stuff on. Look at female politicians. Right? So, but there are motivations for gender bending. So it's really interesting to look at that and interesting to consider the performance of gender in that particular situation. We talked about some of the consequences. And again, one of my big ideas in this entire class is this idea of convergence, which is, what do you remember what I mean by convergence? When something converges, what does that mean?
It comes together.
Comes together. So we are living in this world in which you're on fire. Coming together where face-to-face and CMC converge. Right? And so oftentimes some of the things we might do in CMC, it sort of depends on the situation, that might come and help us in face-to-face or vice versa, or there is that relationship there. We can critique social norms through gender bending. We can challenge patriarchy and oppression. There's sort of a transcendence of gender roles, which I think can be very, very important. There's a quote that I really like. It is indeed a truly disorienting experience the first time one finds oneself being treated as a member of the opposite sex. My own forays into the realm of virtual masculinity were at first frightening, once deprived of the social tools which I, as a female, was used to deploying and relying on. I felt rudderless, unable to negotiate in the most simple of social interactions. So it's really interesting. But we can sort of try to transcend the gender binary. And folks, you know, can be optimistic about this stuff. It can be, again, a valuable space, the internet, a valuable space in which to study gender and sexuality, because people can change their gender markings and identity. So there is some stuff, but at the same time, and this is when the gaming comes into effect, as illustrated in the performance of gender can further objectify women and encourage the enactment of traditional gender roles. And so when men sometimes gender bend as women, they might do so in such a way that sustains the various stereotypes that we want to challenge, particularly in games when women become primarily objects of sexual desire and pretty much nothing else. But still, interesting work. Now, cybersex. Woohoo! Go team.
I like little history.
Yeah, little robots kissing one another. So what is cybersex?
Sexting.
What? It's basically sexting or other things. It says here, two online users engaging in private discourse about sexual fantasies. The dialogue is usually accompanied by...
So if it's more than two, it's not cybersex?
What's that? What'd you just say?
I said two, so if it's more than two, what is it?
Two online, it's cyber orgy. I don't know. Cyber sex, it says two online users engaging in private discourse about sexual fantasies. The dialogue, this is a quote, dialogue is usually accompanied by self-stimulation. And then Ben Zaiv has a longer definition here. Social interaction between at least two people, Cynthia, there we go. At least two people who are exchanging real-time digital messages in order to become sexually aroused. People send provocative and erotic messages to each other with the purpose of bringing each other to orgasm as they masturbate together in real time. I can't believe I'm talking about this in class.
Great.
Cyber sex requires the articulation of sexual desire to an extent that would be most unusual in face-to-face encounter. Okay, in cyberspace, that which often remains unspoken must be put into words. Okay, so that's what cyber sex is. And searching for sex. It's really interesting because the research shows a lot of people are engaged in this. And you don't have to have the last name of Wiener. I still can't figure that guy out. Still makes me laugh. I mean, it's so terrible, particularly when he was sexting that young girl from South Carolina who was a minor. Y'all know who I'm talking about. And
Yeah,
former
Anthony
Congressman Anthony Weiner,
Yeah.
who got caught sexting pics of his wiener.
You know what's the
Oh,
worst
ironic.
thing, though?
What's
It's
that?
Dick Johnson.
Oh, that's pretty bad too. Yeah. Wow. But in any case, did you know, and I've actually presented on this before, speaking of that, Tricky Dick, Dick Nixon, no, that was not Dick Nixon. No, that's Dick Nixon. President Johnson apparently used his Johnson for political clout. Apparently it was humongous, and he would get it out at meetings to intimidate people. This is documented. This is documented.
And they would just what, like, okay, fail.
I don't know. But there's lots of stuff out there about that.
Takes out a whole new meaning to walk softly and carry a big stick.
That's pretty good. But it's really interesting, the research on President Johnson and his manhood. But here's the thing. It's so interesting about the research, the stats on all this type of stuff. A lot of people do it, and this is, again, a little bit dated, and I can only imagine that the stats are quite different but have increased. We talked about, obviously, sex is one of the most searched topics on the internet. In a survey of 760 college students, this person documented poor use of online sexual content. Usually people want entertainment, sexual gratification, they're seeking partners, or in-person exploitation. About 40% of people went on to meet new people or to view sexually explicit material. But basically, both married and unmarried men and women tend to participate in cyber sex, says the research. Multiple websites match partners who desire single dating. We all know that. Cyber sex covers a wide range of relationships, including but not limited to cyber romances, cyber affairs. Yet many cyber sex partners never meet face to face. Thus, while cyber sex is often characterized by illusionary idealized sexual relationships, cyber sex conversations obviate very little of the expression of ideas, fantasies, and pleasures as live in development of relationships that many use experience as real. So sometimes folks think, I'm having a real relationship, even though I might not actually ever touch this other person. So it's just really interesting. Here's a quote I liked about this. Online romantic relationships combine features of close and remote relationships. In In online relationships, people are neither close, intimate friends, nor complete strangers. They are also not lust friends. Online relationships constitute a unique kind of relationship termed detached attachment. Like direct face-to-face relationships, online relationships can be spontaneous and casual and show intensive personal involvement. So just like all the stuff that we talked about, when people think you cannot have a sense of closeness online, they're saying, not so much. There's research to indicate that some of this stuff can be very useful for folks who engage in it. And there's opportunities to develop relationships with others who enjoy uncommon relational sexual practices, where you can't oftentimes do that. I mean, there's lots of pros, if you want to call those pros. One thing that I thought was interesting, and we all know this because we've covered this before, but self-disclosure, there's a big difference between face-to-face and CMC. People tend to self-disclose more, or CMC rather than face-to-face, so folks can sort of, through cyberspace, perhaps virtually live out fantasies. As though one thing that indicates, or one thing the research indicates, that self-disclosure did not come back to face-to-face relationships, which I think is sort of interesting, because we have talked before about how folks who might be a little bit more introverted and have difficulty disclosing stuff face-to-face might disclose stuff online, and then that could be sort of a start to having a face-to-face conversation. Apparently, the research says that within this context of sexual self-disclosure, it tends to stay online. And it talks about self-presentation and deception, so we're still dealing with presentation management and all that type of stuff. It talks about this idea of ACE. So ACE is the place. Do you remember when they changed that? I love it. What did the old ACE commercial say? ACE is the place for the helpful hardware man. Now it says ACE is the place for the helpful hardware. What is that person?
Yeah, store.
Okay, well they changed it. But in any case, so ACE, anatomy, convenience, and escape. The ACE model. So oftentimes we're always still dealing with ideas of anonymity, that people aren't always going to know exactly who we are unless we tell them. We're dealing with things of convenience. It's easy to get online. And I imagine, I have not ever done this, but I imagine it's not difficult to find somebody to have cyber sex with. I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe it is.
Probably easier for girls.
Is it? Escape. Which you just want to escape the real world and all the constraints of the real world. So there's, lots of very interesting things about this. But oftentimes what happens is that when we're dealing with anonymity and everything like that, there can be potentially deception. But is that important? I think it sort of depends on the context. It depends on the situation. And then they talk about issues of infidelity. Is cyber cheating really cheating? And they talk about recreational versus compensation hypothesis. So there's these different hypotheses about this. The recreational hypothesis asserts that such users are sexually permissive sensation seekers. What does that mean? It's like, I want to try some things out. I want to do it online. Cool. It's for recreation. Like I'm going to, go to the zoo or something. Instead of going to the zoo, though, I'm going to have cyber sex. That was probably a bad comparison. The compensation hypothesis describes such users as looking to find others to compensate for their own inadequacies. Or maybe they don't have romance in their lives, so they find it online. And then they say that there's, two basic, another view is there are basically two motivations: infidelity, emotional, sexual desires.